Apparently, when you run a country, you also get an airplane. If I'd known that, I could have just skipped flight school and ran for president. But which taxpayers are getting their leader the absolute best plane? We're about to find out. These are the top 10 coolest airplanes that leaders of the free world get to fly. Starting off with number 10, we got Germany's Airbus A350-900. Germany has 3 of these A350-900 aircraft that serve as the official long-haul transport for the high-ranking government officials, including the president and chancellor. The 3 different aircraft are operated by the German Air Force, and in true typical German fashion, they've given them the name of government aircraft, which is this word, which I'm not going to even attempt to say. The 3 jets are named Konrad Adenauer, Theodor Heuss, and Kurt Schumacher, which are all former German chancellors, which is kind of like a president, but apparently not like a president because they also have a president, but I don't really quite understand all the logistics of that, and it's a little too political for me to even care. But they got these A350s to replace their aging A340 fleet, which are 4-engine aircraft, so a lot less fuel efficient. Now, all these aircraft have been modified by Lufthansa, and they feature custom VIP interiors, and although the specific details are confidential, I'm assuming for security reasons, the cabins are designed to include work and conference areas, private meeting spaces, and multifunctional lounges. I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean, but lounges. They also have all the special defense things that you'd want your leader of your country to have. I'm hoping there's something cool on there, like lasers, but it didn't mention anything about lasers, but that'd be cool to have on your plane. And then obviously snacks. Next up at number 9, we have United Kingdom's Airbus A330-200. The United Kingdom uses a specially modified Airbus A330 named Vespina. I, of course, was very curious like what that name meant, and I, being a typical American, was thinking like it probably was some World War II bomber that just like couldn't be shot down and ran through tons of missions, and it just survived the war and it did super well, and so this was like a throwback as to the heritage of something like that. That's what I was thinking that it was named after. I was wrong. It was named after this. It's a type of moth. That's what they came up with. I looked like 3 different ways to search if that was accurate, and apparently that's what they decided was the way that they were going to come up with that name, a moth. Now, this aircraft is referred to as a multi-role tanker transport aircraft known in the Royal Air Force as the Voyager, which has 2 missions, which is actually really unique. While configured for VIP transport, it also retains its primary role, which is military aerial refueling and strategic transport, which honestly I had no idea that was even a thing, but usually a lot of these, because I talked to guys who were tanker pilots, the newer tanker pilots, those guys have told me that those tankers are able to not only refuel other aircraft, so fighter jets or other planes that are nearby, but the newer tankers are designed to also be able to use that fuel. I guess some of the older tankers, they couldn't use that fuel, but the newer tankers can use that fuel, which makes it great because you can really fly a long way if your aircraft is a tanker aircraft. But it's nice that it can also be used in military operations. So the times you're not needing, if you're not moving around, they can use it that way. But my guess is they probably mostly use it for VIP charters. And according to what it says on the internet, they got 100 economy seats, 58 business class seats, a conference room, and I'm guessing probably a sleep area or some rest areas for the queen or king or whoever that needs to be on that thing. I'm guessing there's some rest areas for them as well. I'm still having a hard time getting past this name though. Number 8, we got India, which got very creative with their Boeing 777-300ER, calling it Air India 1. Creative. They have a fleet of 2 custom Boeing 777-300ERs, and these planes are dedicated exclusively to the travel of the President, Vice President, and Prime Minister, and are operated by the Indian Air Force. Before these triples, they actually were operating older 747s. And when I was doing the research for this, it said they were borrowed 747s. I don't know quite how you borrow 747, but I'm open if anybody's looking to lend one out. And then they got rid of them, obviously, because they're not so fuel efficient, and the 777s are very fuel efficient. It's a great plane. They took delivery of these during COVID, October 2020. Apparently they have missile defense systems and all the toys to deflect those incoming threats. It says online they have 2 conference rooms, a press briefing room, and other office space. And it also has a medical center with a permanently stationed doctor, which makes sense if you've seen some of my videos. If you have a medical emergency on the plane and it's life-threatening, it can be a problem, especially if you're over the ocean. You could be an hour or a couple hours away from getting on the ground. So having a full-time doctor on staff, especially if you have the leaders of your countries or other countries that are on board, you'd want to have medical personnel on board because you would want to have someone there who can do as many procedures as you could possibly do on a plane. So it makes a lot of sense to have that. Next up, we got Saudi Arabia's Boeing 747-400, which is interesting because their aircraft are actually managed by the Saudi Arabian government, but it says that it's operated by a private company that also operates things for the King of Saudi Arabia. So I'm not really sure how all that works, but that's different from most other countries. The current fleet includes a Boeing 747-400 as the primary long-haul VIP configured aircraft, probably slightly fancier than my 747-400 freighter, but the Saudi royals also have aircraft that are considered flying palaces, equipped with luxury amenities tailored for royal comfort and business. This specific 747 includes features such as guest bedrooms, a plush lounge area, and formal dining. And it also said it had a golden throne. And for those of us that are Americans, I'm not talking about this kind of throne, but I think it has actually one of these kinds of thrones. And another feature that it has apparently like a golden escalator. And now gold's really heavy, and obviously on an aircraft, weight is usually a concern. Obviously the 747 has a lot of lift, so we could move a lot of weight. And I guess if you're only flying around with 20 or 30 people and some couches and beds and stuff, then it's not really a big deal. It's just strange because gold's so heavy and you normally see that on a plane because it's a weight issue, but I guess if you have a lot of lift that your plane can do, then and you want to have a golden throne and golden elevator, then you can do whatever you want when you become the king or ruler of a country. But it's unique, let's say it like that. The fleet also includes other modern wide-body aircraft, including the Boeing 777-300ER and 2 Boeing 787s. These were added to replace some of the older aircraft and increase reliability. The aircraft are all painted in a distinctive livery featuring the national colors. It's reported that the king has an entourage up to 1,500 people on some trips, so obviously you're not going to fit all those people onto one plane unless you make them stand, which wouldn't be very nice. But you're going to need a bunch of wide-body aircraft to get that many people to whatever event you need them all to go to. So they got a whole fleet of different Boeing aircraft to get them there, which I can't hate. At number 6, we have France with their Airbus A330-200. I'm not going to lie, I love the way that the Air France people say Air France. I don't know. Every time I hear them on the radio, I don't ever transmit it, but I always do it. And I got a good friend of mine who's French, and anytime he says it, I say it that way too. I don't know. I think it's so cool the way they say it. The French accent is so distinct, and the way the French say some things, I think, man, that's so cool. But anyways, France has got their own little deal. Their aircraft is known as Cotum 001. I'm not sure if that's the correct way to say it, but the one thing I can assure you is all the time I've spent in France is that no matter how correct I say it, I didn't say it correct. That's the one thing I've learned in French and in France. No matter how correct it is, it's still not correct. Obviously, this Airbus was modified. It was put into service in 2010, and the aircraft has a special call sign, which is this word here, which I'm not going to even try to pronounce because I have no idea how to even say that. But apparently they only use that when the president's on board, and they actually use it to replace an A319, which is strange because that plane is not used for long-haul travel, even if you were to do a lot of things. So it's not really an ideal plane, but that's what they were using prior to this. So it makes sense why they have an older plane, because they had to get rid of that A319 because you're not going to get a lot of range out of that thing. Unlike in the US where the president only flies on one aircraft, the French also use 2 Falcon 7X business jets as backup VIP charters in case of runway length or distance constraints are really too impractical for the A330, which makes sense. So they have their main one and a backup. In the US, obviously, we have a little different plan, which we're going to get into in just a second. Next up, we have Canada with their A330-200, known as Can Force One. Interesting choice that you're going to come up with if you're going to name your presidential plane. Can Force One. No judgment, but yes, also some judgment. I double checked it because I thought that seemed like a really strange name if you could call your presidential airplane anything, that you were going to go with Can Force One, but Canada does have some really cool things about the country, so just thought they could come up with something a little bit better than this. This Airbus A330-200 is part of a new fleet of the Royal Canadian Air Force. They started flying it in 2023 to replace the A310, which preceded it. Now, like the UK, Canada's A330 also does air refueling, which again, I think is really cool, because here you could be flying your A330, you got a bunch of extra fuel, but that means you could also refuel fighter jets as they fly along with you. I mean, it's cool, it's practical. I love everything about it. I think it's a great concept. I don't know if Air Force One does that, and we're about to find out here in a second, but I think it's really cool to have that feature, because you have a military aircraft that you're able to use in different situations when you're not using it in a wartime situation. So you're able to use it for refueling jets, you're able to use it for transport, and the people that are on the aircraft are able to use it to carry extra fuel with them, assuming that that plane is configured to be able to take the fuel that it's using for transport, which I would imagine, being as new as it is, they would have that feature. Online it says there are no luxurious private cabin or bed or shower, nor does it have any of the sophisticated missile defense systems, but it's expected to be fitted on sometime in the future. Which I have to imagine putting on the missile defense systems on an aircraft have to be wildly expensive, because pilots always joke about, like, if you're going to get any part that you would use for anything else, if you make that same exact identical part, but for a plane, it's like 10 times the cost. So I have to imagine something that's like a missile defense system for an aircraft has got to be wildly expensive. So it makes sense, if you don't need it, why buy it? But I guess they're going to get it at a later date, but they haven't pissed off enough countries yet to need it. So that's their current strategy. Now, for what it's worth, Canada have designated this type of aircraft as a Husky, which is a tribute to the 437th Squadron, which has used that name and its mascot and call sign since 1944. Now that is one of the coolest things, because I know that the pilots that are flying that are going to have a lot of pride, because you attach something like that all the way back to World War II. Those guys are going to see pictures and people wearing different insignia that they're attached to that, and they're going to have a lot of pride being attached to something like that. So I think that's the only one so far that I've seen that has that. I think it's really cool to have that historical reference over there. I do think they should call me before they name their next plane, though. All right, next up, number 4, we have Japan. They have 2 777-300ERs. And just like India, they originally were using the 747-400, but moved to the more fuel-efficient 777s in 2019. These aircraft are operated by the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, which operates these 2 planes as Japan Air Force 1 and Japan Air Force 2. But the name kind of threw me when I saw that Japanese Air Self-Defense. I didn't know what that meant, and then I remembered. And after their little oopsie from their 1940s, their Article 9 of the Constitution made it where it prohibits the maintenance of traditional military forces with offensive capabilities. Now, I do love my 747-400. Having 4 engines in the middle of the ocean on a dark night when it's stormy outside, it gives me warm and fuzzy feelings. But you're noticing this trend where people are going away from these 4-engine jets to these 2-engine jets, because these new engines are so reliable. They've had so many years of testing, and then they've been through almost every circumstance anybody can imagine, that they're so reliable you don't really need it. They do special planning when they're building these routes, so you're closer to a landing facility. Then when you have a 4-engine jet, you don't really need that. They'll put you out in the middle of the ocean over nowhere with nothing nearby to land, because the idea of losing multiple engines is extremely unlikely. You see these rings on this flight plan here. That allows those planes to be able to get safely to an airport. And on a 747, we don't need that, but those engines are so reliable, I would feel good on any 2-engine aircraft, especially with one of these newer ones. Now, Japan uses their triples for the Emperor, Prime Minister, and other high-ranking officials, and the aircraft are modified with secure satellites, communication systems, and all the normal toys that you would want the leader of your country to have. Something unique, though, that the Japanese do that is different from everybody else when it comes to the maintenance. Most countries, they use the military to conduct their own maintenance, but the aircraft maintenance of these aircraft are actually done by Japanese airlines. They operate a fleet of 777s, and they've had over 46 throughout the years. Now, I've flown on JAL. I call it JAL, but that's one of my favorite airlines. The service is great, and the people are great. I've always had a really great experience, really classy things. I think one of the earliest posts I ever did on Instagram. I was on a deadhead and I got a handwritten note from the captain and a little 787 stuffed animal, I don't know what you call it, stuffed airplane, like a toy. It was just really classy, and every time I go there, they're very, very classy. And I will say the maintenance that is done by, when I do it in Japan and I have something that breaks or needs something to get fixed, the Japanese, their work ethic, their integrity, the way that they have a lot of pride and honor in the work that they do, regardless of how far up or down they are on the food chain, it always gives me a good, comfortable feeling that I know that they're doing the absolute best they can do. I can't say that for a lot of countries, but I would trust the Japanese people to do any maintenance checks, and I would prefer them to do a lot of my maintenance checks, because there are places that we go where they go, oh, we fixed this thing, and it's something that I really would like to have working on my aircraft. I know if the Japanese did it, it's probably going to be fine. There are some countries where I think that thing's going to break somewhere in flight. But if it was unsafe, I wouldn't do it, but you get my point. Really good service. Next up, we got the Russians' Ilyushin IL-96. It's the same plane that Putin took when he came over to Alaska to meet Trump earlier this year. And you would think, with all the months of my life that I've spent in Alaska on layovers or sitting there or waiting for a plane or whatever, that I would get to be there to see such a historic event. But I wasn't. I didn't get to see it. I didn't know where I was, but I didn't get to see that. And I would have loved to see that, even if I was in my hotel and seeing the plane come in. I think it would have been pretty awesome. As you might imagine, this aircraft is heavily modified for long range, and it's actually manufactured inside of Russia. It's the only non-Boeing or Airbus aircraft on this list, and the Russians are using it to be self-sufficient, which I think is pretty smart. It's something you should do. The plane is operated by a special flight division of the Russian government, and the fleet is comprised of several of these aircraft, and they're known as Flying Kremlins. I don't know, kind of interesting. And at the end of it, they have this designator called PU, and apparently that means it's that command center. Like if you were to translate that into English, it's a command center. So it's a special version, obviously, that Putin's going to be flying around on, or whoever is running the country at that time. So it's a special command center, which is kind of the designation that this plane has that not all the other Ilyushins have. I'm sure just like Air Force One, this plane has all the crazy gadgets to keep you safe, but one of the things that I found really interesting is that according to the internet, it has an EMP attack preventer, which if there was an EMP, should in theory render most modern airplanes actually useless. So that either means that they have some type of complex system that is designed to prevent the impacts of an EMP, that's option one, or they're using the old analog data where the EMP isn't going to impact something like that, or a combination of both. I have no idea. I still haven't got my invite to that plane either. I don't know what they're waiting for, but they have something in there to prevent an EMP. I'm sure they've kind of thought through everything, especially after the relations like Cold War and all that stuff. A lot of money has been spent on research and discovery, and what if they did this and what if they did that? Just like in the Air Force One, they're going to do a lot of that same research and come up with their own prevention techniques for things like that, because they are a big nation and they have a big impact. So they're going to want to have that type of stuff protected. Putin apparently also has a king-size bed, gold-plated accents in the bathroom, and for security, they have 2 identical aircraft prepared for any trip, which I think is pretty common. Once you get to a certain level, you prepare 2. That way, if somebody is going to try to ruin one, the likelihood is significantly reduced, and that way you're always having a decoy, essentially, which is smart. A lot of presidents of countries do that, and it makes sense. You would think it's a waste, but in my mind, it makes a lot of sense. All right, number 2, we have China's 747-8, and apparently, and this is according to the internet, unlike most of these other planes which are dedicated to the presidents or the leaders of those countries, this plane, if you wanted to fly in it, is possible. Interesting, because it's one of their flag carriers, Air China. The specific aircraft most often used by the president is the 747-8 with the registration number 2479. This jet features a unique VIP configuration distinct from the standard passenger aircraft, but when it's not on official duty, they reconfigure the entire aircraft and they use it on a regular route to run from Beijing to Dulles. Interesting. It's a lot of work to remove all these seats and redo the configuration, but that's what they say happens. Now, the aircraft has undergone the extensive modifications for security and communications. Reportedly, it has a luxurious master suite, executive offices, a lounge, and the typical command and control centers for a country like China. And in total coincidence, and by the fact that I made up this list myself, we've arrived to the #1 aircraft, which is Air Force One, who has still not invited me despite all my thirsty attempts to get on their aircraft, and I promise, Mr. Trump, if you let me on the plane, I will not eat all your snacks. I think it's safe to say this is the most famous of all these aircraft on the list. It goes by the call sign Air Force One when President Trump is on board or whoever is the president at that time. It's considered to be the most sophisticated and iconic government aircraft in the world. And like a lot of countries, they have two identical 747s that they're using. I've seen them doing practice takeoffs and landings at places that I've been in the world, which I think is pretty awesome that they do it like that instead of the sim, because there is a difference. There's the real thing. In the sim, I'll be honest, it's very, very close, but when you're dealing with something as important as the leader of your country, then it's worth it to spend a little extra gas and go do it in the real thing. But these 747s are actually one of the oldest aircraft on this list. They're referred to by 747 pilots as classics. These are Boeing 747-200s. They're designed just like every other leader's planes to be mobile command centers, but these are significantly older than all these other aircraft that are on there. And obviously, you probably heard, they're going to be upgrading them pretty soon to 747-8s. Now, one thing Air Force One has apparently that I don't know or I can't confirm or deny it, but supposedly, they have the ability to actually do air refueling, where they're able to actually receive fuel mid-flight, and which I think is a pretty cool feature. The plane includes large presidential suites like bedrooms and bathrooms, a conference room, press area, and an onboard operating room staffed with doctors and staff. Now, I've flown a lot of 747s in different configurations. This being a classic, I've never operated one of these, but it says it can hold up to 100 people, which is pretty spacious. Our VIP charter 747-400s that we take has more than 100 people, and it's very spread out. They have a area in the back of the plane on the main deck for not the players and not the like the administrative people or maybe the press people on our versions of that. I'm guessing the president's version is similar to that. Once I get on there, I'll be able to tell you more, but my guess is that they have something like that in the back for the press people. And even with that, still 100, means there's a lot of other cool, exciting things on this aircraft. While they haven't released the exact date that these 747-8s are going to be coming, they're expected to replace these classics very soon. And I'm kind of excited to see whatever photos they end up releasing about it, because I think it's going to be really cool. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.